I am Nancy Rolock from Case Western Reserve University. I will be presenting today with Kevin White from East Carolina University. We will be presenting on the Post-Adoption and Guardianship Instability Toolkit. We are 2 members of the project team. The team also includes Rong Bay and Chelsea Flanagan from Case Western Reserve University, and Heather Ringeisen, Layla Stambaugh, and Rose Domenico from RTI International. We would like to recognize our funders, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, our project officers, Alicia Blandon and Jackie Gross, and our Children's Bureau partners. During this recording, we walk through each component of the Post-Adoption and Guardianship Instability Toolkit. Next. On this slide, we will review key terms used in the toolkit. Post-adoption and guardianship instability is when children who have exited foster care to adoption or guardianship no longer live with their adoptive parent or legal guardian. An example of this is when children re-enter foster care or when they experience homelessness after adoption or guardianship. Tracking instability is a data-driven process that records data in a systematic and consistent way, building on the information already collected. Lastly, we have 4 categories related to stability to define. No recent contact. This is when, despite efforts to contact the family, the agency has had no contact with the family over the past year. You should not make assumptions about the child or the youth's stability status. Stability. This means the child has not re-entered foster care. You or someone in your agency has been in contact with the family and you know that they are doing well. Stability unclear. This is when you have received information that suggests the child may be experiencing some difficulties. For example, a youth or caregiver could tell the agency that they are struggling with their familial relationships. Instability. This refers to a situation when you have information indicating that a child who exited foster care through adoption or guardianship no longer resides with their adoptive parent or legal guardian. Next. On this slide, we will discuss the rationale for developing this toolkit. We conducted the agency study to learn about how agencies are in contact with or receive information about children who have exited foster care through adoption or guardianship. We found that agencies vary in their readiness to track post-adoption or guardianship instability, and that a one-size-fits-all approach for tracking instability will not work. We wanted to develop tools to track instability that build on data that agencies already collect. Next. The title of this slide is Tracking Instability Takes Resources. We would like to acknowledge that tracking post-adoption and guardianship instability is a huge job. Many adoption program managers we have spoken to have mentioned how much they wish they had time, resources, and staff to dedicate to tracking instability and to better understand the needs of families who have adopted or assumed guardianship of children in foster care. This toolkit is based on discussions with adoption program managers across the country about what types of data would help them understand instability. It is also based on our experience as researchers and the data we have used to track instability in states across the country. Next. This slide outlines the toolkit goals. The goals of the toolkit are to provide tools that states can use to help track post-adoption and guardianship instability in the short and long term. Provide a range of tool options that fit different levels of agency readiness, and to spark ideas about how your agency might use the data you already collect differently to help track post-adoption and guardianship instability, even if those tools are not yet feasible within your agency context today. Next. This slide outlines the toolkit structure. The toolkit is organized into 3 components. First is a tracking workbook. In today's webinar, we will be explaining how to use the 7 spreadsheets that make up the tracking workbook. Each of the 7 spreadsheets are a tool that can be used to collect different sources of data to help track post-adoption and guardianship instability. The second component of the toolkit is the user guide that explains how to use the tools within the tracking spreadsheet. The third component of the toolkit is an example of a well-being letter. This letter provides sample questions that ask about the child's well-being. This can be found in the user guide appendix. All 3 components of the toolkit, the tracking workbook, the user guide, and the well-being letter, will be posted publicly on the OPRE website. On the right-hand side of this page is a picture of the cover of the toolkit user guide. Next. The title of this slide is Tracking Workbook Structure. The main component of the toolkit is a spreadsheet. Each tool is a spreadsheet tab in the tracking workbook. You do not need to use all tools. You can pick those that fit your agency needs. On the right-hand side of this slide is a screenshot of the tracking spreadsheet. The font on this image is small, but what we want to point out are the different colored tabs at the bottom of the image. Each of these tabs is associated with a different tool that uses a different data source. Not all of the tools need to be used for the spreadsheet to work. You can pick and choose. Today, we're going to walk through each of the tools within the spreadsheet. Next. This slide outlines the different ways to use the toolkit. These include using all of the tools. This provides a comprehensive standalone system for tracking post-adoption and guardianship instability by compiling information across several sources in one place. You may also use individual tools. This option allows the agency to select the tools that reflect the needs and data collection capabilities of your agency. The user guide provides guidance on how to do this and the information collected about post-adoption and guardianship instability. You can also choose to use the spreadsheets in the toolkit as a guide or template to create or update your internal data systems. The toolkit can provide a starting point for conversations within your agency about what information you collect to understand instability. Things to consider might be, what instability data does your agency already track? How is data that you collect stored? What resources are needed to expand your ability to track instability? What are the limitations to accessing the data you need to track instability? How can you access data about services received by adoptive and guardianship families? Next. We will start with Tool 1. Tool 1 is titled Spreadsheet to Compile Child IDs and Case Information in Preparation for Tracking Instability. We refer to this as Tool 1, Child ID. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 1. The purpose of this tool is to compile the child-level information needed to track instability. When children IDs change after adoption or guardianship, and then children come back into foster care, the only way to capture reentry is for all IDs for a single child to be compiled in one location. Compiling all child IDs in one place allows agencies to determine the rate at which children and youth are experiencing instability. The data for this tool comes from your SACWIS or other administrative data systems. The type of information collected in Tool 1 is a list of children who exited foster care to adoption or guardianship and their agency-assigned child IDs. This tool is helpful as it is the foundational to the toolkit. The information entered here will be used to identify the children whose instability is tracked in each subsequent tools. Next. This slide, also related to Tool 1, addresses the issue of single versus multiple IDs. For agencies where child IDs change at the time of adoption or guardianship, Tool 1 is both the most important tool and possibly the most challenging. It's challenging because for agencies where the foster care ID and adoption IDs have not been linked, you will need to work with the data systems team to help figure out how to match these IDs and compile them in one location. This can be quite burdensome, and it may be that you want to engage someone from outside, like a university partner who is familiar with your data system, to assist with this initial step. For agencies where a single ID is used for the child, this step will be fairly straightforward. Next. This slide addresses how Tool1 will help your agency track instability. In thinking about how Tool1 can help your agency track instability, please consider that when child IDs change after adoption and then children come back into foster care, their reentry may be associated with their foster care ID, their adoption ID, or with a new ID. The only way to capture reentry is if foster and adoption IDs are compiled in one location. With all child IDs in one location, your agency can determine the rate at which children and youth are reentering foster care after adoption. Next. This slide reviews steps involved with using Tool1, the Child ID tool. The title of this slide is Step 1, list all the children who exited foster care through adoption or guardianship. First, open the tracking spreadsheet. The opening tab includes basic instructions. The second tab is Tool1. An image of the columns from Tool1 are on this slide. The first column is the child's first, then last name, followed by their foster care ID and adoption ID, the child's date of birth, sex, race, and ethnicity, the date of adoption or guardianship, and finally, the type of legal permanence, adoption or guardianship. We will refer back to this grouping of information as child demographic information. The first step to tracking post-adoption and guardianship instability is to create a list of all children who exited foster care through adoption or guardianship during a specific time period. Based on research, we suggest that you enter the following information for all children who have exited foster care to adoption or guardianship over the past 5 or more years. It is important to note that when using the spreadsheet, if you copy and paste a large list of child and caregiver information into Tool1, please ensure that this information is pasted in the same order as the column headers within Tool1 tab. Some of the information from Tool1 tab is repeated in subsequent tools, and the order needs to be the same. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, include all foster care and adoption child IDs. This will differ by agency. Some child welfare agencies create an adoption ID when a child is adopted and retire the child's foster care ID. Then if a child re-enters foster care after adoption, some agencies use their foster care ID, while others use their adoption ID. Some child welfare agencies do not change child IDs at the time of adoption or guardianship. This is usually the case for guardianship and why we focus primarily on adoptions when talking about changing IDs. For agencies where the child ID changes at the time of adoption, Tool1 is set up with 2 columns to include a foster care ID and an adoption ID. Some systems could have more IDs. If this is your situation, you may insert additional columns at the end of Tool1 tab after the comments column. If your agency uses the same child ID before and after adoption, enter 1 child ID into the tracking sheet in the foster care ID column. Leave the adoption ID column blank. This concludes Tool1 child ID. Next. Tool 2 is titled Spreadsheet to Compile Child ID and Case Information in Preparation for Tracking Instability. We refer to this as Tool 2 Data Flag. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 2. When children re-enter foster care after adoption or guardianship, some agencies use a flag in their child welfare administrative data systems to identify children who have re-entered foster care after adoption or guardianship. The Tool 2 Data Flag tab incorporates information about instability using this data flag. The data for this tool comes from your SACWIS or other administrative data systems. For agencies that have a data flag, this tool should be fairly straightforward. For agencies that do not have a data system flag, we provide suggestions on what should be included if you want to develop a flag. You may skip this tool if you do not have the resources to develop a data systems flag at this time. Next. The title of this slide is, how will Tool 2 help your agency track instability? When children re-enter foster care, there may be challenges in identifying them in the administrative data. For example, many agencies change IDs at adoption, making it difficult to link a child to their foster care record. This tool integrates both the adoption and guardianship ID and the foster care record at the child level to help track instability events. Next. These next few slides review the steps involved with using Tool 2, the data flag. The title of this slide is Step 1, List All Children. If you are using the Toolkit spreadsheet, the child demographic information you entered in Tool 1 will auto-populate to Tools 2 through 6 with the information you have already entered. On this slide, we show an image of this section of the spreadsheet depicting columns A through J with their headings. There will be a row for each child's information entered. The first step is the same for Tools 2 through 6. So as we walk through the other tools, we won't repeat this step again. We will start with Step 2. If you are not using Tool 1, please follow steps outlined in Tool 1 to complete these columns in Tool 2, columns A through J. Next. This slide is titled Step 2, Determine if your agency used a data flag. If your agency does have a data flag, go to Step 3. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, if your agency does not have a data flag. If your agency does not have a data flag, we recommend creating a data flag using mandatory questions. On this slide, we have listed 2 sample questions, one for adoption and one for guardianship, and possible responses. These questions are also in the user guide. The first sample question is, was this child previously adopted? With response options, yes or no. If yes, the user then selects the type of adoption from the following 6 options. This child welfare agency, a different public child welfare system, intercountry adoption, private domestic adoption, an unsubsidized adoption, or other, please specify. The second question is, did this child previously exit the child welfare system through guardianship? If yes, there are 7 options for the type of guardianship, including federally subsidized guardianship program like KinGAP or similar program at this child welfare agency. Federally subsidized guardianship program like KinGAP or similar program at a different public child welfare system. State subsidized guardianship program at this child welfare agency. State subsidized guardianship program at a different public child welfare system. An unsubsidized guardianship, guardianship relinquishment, or other where you can specify the type. Next. The title of this slide is Step 3, Examine Child Welfare Administrative Data for Foster Care Reentry Data Flags. We recommend that agencies examine their child welfare administrative data and keep track of the child IDs recorded in your administrative data that have been flagged by your system as having re-entered foster care after an adoption or guardianship. Please note that the specifics for how to do this will vary by state and county child welfare system, but you are encouraged to look up all child IDs associated with foster care ID and adoption IDs. Next. The title of this slide is Step 4, Enter the foster care reentry date in the spreadsheet. For each child listed in the spreadsheet from Step 1, If there is information indicating that a child has re-entered foster care after their adoption or guardianship, this is a foster care reentry and should be recorded in the foster care reentry date column. For children with no foster care reentry date, leave the field blank. On the right-hand side of this slide, we have an image from the tracking spreadsheet. This image depicts a column titled Foster Care Reentry Date and example date inserted in the first row. Next. The title of this slide is Step 5, Record the Instability Status. On the right-hand side of this slide, there's an image of the instability status column from the tracking spreadsheet. Within this column is a drop-down menu with two options, instability and no recent contact. If you have found a foster care reentry date in the previous step, then select instability from the drop-down menu for instability status column. For children where there is no foster care reentry and therefore no foster care reentry date, please select no recent contact from the drop-down menu. Next. The title of this slide is Step 6, Comments. The comments column is for additional information you want to record about the child. This comment section is available in each tool. On the right-hand side of this slide, there's an image of the comments column from the tracking spreadsheet. This concludes Tool 2, Data Flag. Next. Tool 3 is titled Spreadsheet to Track Instability Using Foster Care Reentry Records. We will refer to this as Tool 3, Foster Care Reentry. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 3. The purpose of this tool is to track foster care reentry data for children who've exited foster care to adoption or guardianship. The data source for Tool 3 is your SACWIS or other administrative data systems. Tool 3 incorporates information about instability using data on foster care reentries. For agencies that have a data systems flag, foster care reentries may be captured in Tool 2. You may want to skip Tool 3. Next. The title of this slide is How Will Tool 3 Help Your Agency Track Instability? Not all agencies have a foster care reentry flag in their data systems. Many agencies change IDs at adoption, making it difficult to link a child to their foster care record. For agencies that do not have a data systems flag, the Tool 3 tab walks you through how to use information from foster care entry data to track post-adoption and guardianship instability. This is likely something that will require additional resources and coordination with the data systems team at your agency. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, Look for Foster Care Reentry Dates in Child Welfare Administrative Data. Just as a reminder, Step 1 remains the same for all tools. You will want to examine your child welfare administrative data to see if any of the child IDs, foster care ID or adoption ID, appear in your foster care entry data. The specifics for how to do this will vary by state and county child welfare systems. Next. The title of this slide is Step 3, Enter the foster care reentry date in the spreadsheet. On this slide is an image of the portion of the Tool 3 tracking worksheet with 3 columns: foster care reentry date, an example date, instability status, and comments. Each row in the spreadsheet represents a unique child. If you have found foster care reentry for a child, insert the foster care reentry date in that column. For children with no foster care reentry records, leave foster care reentry date blank. Next. The title of this slide is Step 4, Record Instability Status. This slide shows the same image from the previous slide with the same 3 columns as the prior slide. In the instability status column in Tool 3, you will find a drop-down menu with 2 options, instability and no recent contact. If there is a foster care reentry date, then please select instability in the drop-down menu for instability status column. For children with no foster care reentry record and therefore no foster care reentry date, select no recent contact from the drop-down menu for instability status column. This concludes Tool 3, Foster Care Reentry. I will pass it over to Kevin to introduce the remaining tools.
Thank you, Nancy. So now Tool 4 is titled Spreadsheet to Track Instability Using Adoption or Guardianship Subsidy Records. We refer to this as Tool 4 Subsidy Changes. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 4. The purpose of Tool 4 is to provide a way for agencies to organize information related to when and why adoption and guardianship subsidy agreements are modified. Administrative data systems track when subsidies are modified, yet they may not track why changes are made. Sometimes agencies make changes to subsidies even when a child does not re-enter foster care, like when a child needs residential treatment, for example. Keeping a record of the reason for subsidy changes helps agencies determine which events are related to instability. The source of data for the Tool 4 tab is your agency's adoption and guardianship subsidy records about the reasons that subsidy changes are requested. This information may not be readily available, and you may need additional resources to add this information into existing data systems. Next. The title of this slide is, how will this tool, Tool 4, help your agency track instability? Administrative data systems track when subsidies are modified, yet they may not track why changes are made. However, changes to subsidy agreements may indicate meaningful changes in the family that have implications for child stability and well-being. It is important to note that not all subsidy changes are related to instability events. For example, when parental rights remain intact while a child receives inpatient treatment. Therefore, keeping a record of the reason for a subsidy change helps agencies determine which events are related to instability. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, Gather Information about Subsidy Changes. This slide shows a screenshot of the columns provided in the tracking spreadsheet for Tool 4, where you will enter data on subsidy changes. These columns include subsidy change request date, who requested the subsidy change reason, the subsidy change was requested, instability status, and comments. As a reminder, there will be a row for each child ID with general child and family information, either auto-populated from Tool 1 or entered in Step 1, but we are not showing those columns here. In the next few slides, we will go through each of the columns shown on this slide. Next. The title of the slide is Step 3, Enter the date of the subsidy change request. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image of the subsidy change request date column from the subsidy spreadsheet, with an example date inserted in the first line. If a family has requested a subsidy change, insert the subsidy change request date in the row for that child. If multiple subsidy changes are requested for the same child, we suggest that you report the most recent subsidy change request. For children with no subsidy change requests, leave subsidy change request date blank. Next. The title of this slide is Step 4, Enter information about who requested the subsidy change. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image that depicts a spreadsheet column labeled Who requested the subsidy change, with options in a drop-down menu of adoptive parent or guardian, birth family member, caseworker, child or youth, Medicaid worker, post-adoption or guardianship staff, or other. For this step, read the information about each subsidy change request and select one option from the drop-down menu to indicate who requested the subsidy change. Please use the other field if there are others requesting the subsidy change who are not included in this list. If you select other from the drop-down menu, please enter the other information into the comments column. Next. The title of this slide is Step 5, Enter information about the reasons for the subsidy changes. On the right-hand side of this slide is an image that depicts a spreadsheet column labeled Reason the subsidy change was requested. This column also has a drop-down menu to select from. The options shown on the slide include adoptive parent or guardian died, adoptive parent or guardian is not using the subsidy for the child's needs or not supporting the child, adoptive parent or guardian made another custody agreement, adoptive parental rights terminated, child behavior issues, child is homeless or has run away, the child is not living at home temporarily, the child is not living at home permanently, child needs group home or residential care, child needs specialized medical care, child needs specialized mental health care, child removed from the home or re-entered foster care, and families that are just requesting supportive services. This list shown here is not exhaustive. The entire list of reasons the subsidy change was requested can be found in the spreadsheet. You will select the reason for the subsidy change from the drop-down menu options in this column. When multiple reasons apply, consider the most pressing issue or most urgent issue for the family and record that issue only. If you want to track additional information on these requests, we recommend you add additional columns at the end of Tool 4 where you can input additional information. You can also add information in the comments column in Tool 4. If you select Other from the drop-down menu, please enter the other information into the comments column. Next. The title of this slide is Step 6, Enter Instability Status. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image depicting the column titled Instability Status with drop-down menu options of No Recent Contact, Stability, Stability Unclear, and Instability. The next step is to determine the instability status for each individual child based on the information in Tool 4. For this column, you should infer instability status from the subsidy change documentation that you have gathered. When entering data into the spreadsheet, please select one of the 4 options listed. These include no recent contact, which means the agency has no record of a subsidy change request. Stability, you have been in contact with family and they are doing well. Stability unclear, you have received information that suggests the child may be experiencing some difficulties. For example, a subsidy change record shows that a youth or caregiver is struggling with accessing services. Or instability, you have information indicating that the child who exited foster care no longer resides with their adoptive parent or legal guardian. This concludes Tool 4, subsidy changes. Next. Tool 5 is titled Spreadsheet to Track Instability Using Post-Adoption and Guardianship Services Records. We refer to this as Tool 5, Family Services. This slide provides, This slide provides an overview of Tool 5. Most agencies are in contact with adoptive and guardianship families after finalization, and many agencies provide post-adoption and guardianship services and support. The purpose of Tool 5 is to use organized agency records about services provided to families after adoption or guardianship to better understand risks for instability. Potential sources of data for Tool 5 are agency records of service information, either internally or from external agencies. An example would be caseworker notes or spreadsheets that contain information about phone calls to caseworkers or an agency hotline about services. This information may include service dates, family needs, and services provided, and the information may be captured by informal or formal records. It may take some work for agencies to systematically track this data. Next. The title of this slide is How Will Tool 5 Help Your Agency Track Instability? A majority, more than 90%, of agencies report that adoptive and guardianship families contact them after finalization. Again, this is something we found in our research and from talking to agencies. Information about services can help agencies understand the challenges that families are facing, as well as the types of services they are seeking. This information can also be used to document when instability has occurred or when current concerns that may lead to instability have been raised. As an example, during service provision, your agency staff may become aware that a child has run away or become homeless and needs supportive services. By keeping a centralized record of service requests, an agency might identify additional cases of instability that are not typically captured elsewhere by the administrative data record. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, Gather Information about Services Provided. Tool 5 is a spreadsheet with drop-down menus to track information related to services requested and/or services provided to adoptive and guardianship families. On this slide is an image of the spreadsheet columns in Tool 5, including date services began, what is the most urgent issue identified by the child, what is the most urgent issue identified for the parent or guardian, services provided, instability status, and comments. These are the columns in Tool 5 where you will enter data on the services the family received for each child listed in the spreadsheet. We will discuss these columns in more detail in the next few slides. Next. The title of this slide is Step 3, Enter the date services began. The image on the right side of the screen is a column from the spreadsheet titled Date Services Began with an example date inserted in the first row. This column is intended to capture information about the dates of services or services requests. Therefore, if you find records that an agency has provided services for a child, then for this column, you would insert the most recent date of services beginning. If no services are recorded, please leave this column blank. Next. The title of this slide is Step 4, Enter the most urgent child issue. After you enter the date services began, if the service was for the child, select the reason the child needed the service from the drop-down menu options in the next column. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image depicting the column in the spreadsheet, prompting the user to identify the most urgent issue for the child from the drop-down menu. Response options shown on the slide for child-related issues include attachment issues, child behavior issues, family conflict or issues, international rehoming, involvement with the juvenile justice system or probation, maltreatment, mental health of the child, parent or guardian death or incapacitation, physical health of the child, respite, and runaway, school-related issue, substance abuse or use, and other. Please note the drop-down menu will not capture every type of issue or service provided. If there are multiple requests for services, we suggest you indicate the reasons for the most recent request. If multiple reasons apply when selecting from this list, please consider the most urgent issue for the child and record that one. Please use the other field if there are other issues for the child not included in this list. If you do select other, please enter the other information into the comments column. If you want to track additional information on services for the child, we recommend adding additional columns to Tool 5. Alternatively, you can add information in the comments column of Tool 5. Next. The title of this slide is Step 5, Enter the most urgent parent or guardian issue. If the service request was for the parent or guardian, select the reason the parent or guardian needed the service from the column for the most urgent issue identified for the parent-guardian drop-down menu options. On the right-hand side of this slide is an image depicting the column in the spreadsheet, which prompts the user to identify the most urgent issue from the parent or for the parent from the drop-down menu. Response options for parent-related issues include attachment issues, death or incapacitation of the parent or guardian, family conflict or issues, financial assistance, housing, information request, international rehoming, maltreatment, mental health of the parent or guardian, respite, substance abuse or use, and other. If there are multiple requests for services, we suggest you indicate the reason for the most recent request. When multiple reasons apply, please consider the most pressing issue for the parent or guardian and record that one. Please use the other field if there are other services not included in this list. If you do select other, please enter the other information into the comments column. Similar to the previous slide, if you want to track additional information on services, we recommend adding additional columns to Tool 5. Alternatively, you can add information in the comments column of Tool 5. Next. The title of this slide is Step 6, Enter the types of services provided. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image depicting the column in the spreadsheet, which prompts the user to identify services provided from a drop-down menu with response options: financial assistance, housing, in-home preservation services, information provided, like tax information, parent or guardian education or support, post-adoption or guardianship support or services, referral for counseling or other mental health services, referral for medical services, referral to other community-based services, referred for legal services, referred to Child Protective Services for investigation, residential placement or group home, school assistance like an IEP or 504 plan, and other. As with the other drop-down menus, please select the most recent or important service provided. If you select Other from the drop-down menu, enter the other information into the comments column. And again, you may use the comments column or add columns to Tool 5 to record other services. Next. The title of this slide is Step 7, Enter Instability Status. The final step for Tool 5 is to determine the instability status for each individual child based on information entered into Tool 5. On the right-hand side of the slide is an image of a column titled Instability Status with a drop-down menu. You're asked to select one of these 4 options from the drop-down menu. No recent contact. The agency has no record of services provided to the family. Stability. The agency has been in contact with the family and they are doing well. Stability unclear. You have received information that suggests the child may be experiencing some difficulties. Instability, which means you have information indicating that the child who exited foster care through adoption or guardianship no longer resides with their adoptive parent or legal guardian. This concludes Tool 5, Family Services. Next. Tool 6 is titled Wellbeing Letter Example and Spreadsheet to track instability using information from wellbeing letters. We refer to this as Tool 6, Wellbeing Letters. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 6. This tool is comprised of 2 parts, a wellbeing letter example and a spreadsheet to track responses to the letter. This tool is designed to learn about instability from the information that agencies receive and responses to letters that agencies routinely send to adoptive and guardianship families. These letters typically verify contact information, recertify that children who exited foster care to adoption or guardianship are still in the home, and potentially also ask about well-being information for the child, such as educational information. We want to acknowledge that setting up a system to track responses to these well-being letters may be time-consuming for agencies. Next. The title for this slide is, How will Tool 6 help an agency track instability? Well-being letters give an opportunity for agencies to have regular contact with parents and guardians after permanency. These letters generally include simple questions to update contact information, learn if there are requests for additional services, and learn if there are incidents that would meet the criteria to terminate a subsidy. Responses to well-being letters can augment the instability record by providing information not available in administrative data sources. Your responses to these questions will also help plan for the types of services and supports that adoptive and guardianship families may need. And again, an example well-being letter is included as an appendix in the user guide. Next. The title for this slide is Example Well-being Letter. The example letter includes optional questions that your agency may ask. These questions cover, for example, the status of the child and the parent or guardian's confidence that they can meet their child's needs and ask for help when needed and know where to go to get information to help their child. However, you may revise the letter for your agency and decide which questions to include. The example questions that use rating scales are more complex and should be considered an extra if you want to use them. The spreadsheet for this tool includes a column for each question included in the example letter so that you can record responses to that question if you use any of them. If you use different questions, you will need to edit the spreadsheet. Next. The title of this slide is Record Dates Associated with the Letter. On the right-hand side is an image with two columns used to track the dates well-being letters are sent to and received from families. Example dates are inserted in the first row of each column. For these two columns in the spreadsheet, if a letter has been sent, insert the most recent date letter sent, and if not, leave this column blank. If a response has been received, insert the date it was received under the date responses received column. If no response was received, leave the date responses received column blank. If a letter was not sent for a child, leave the date letter sent column blank in the row for that child. Next. The title of this slide is Enter Instability Status. This slide outlines recording instability status from a well-being letter. Similar to other tools we have discussed, there is also a column in Tool 6 to record instability status. If the family did not respond to the well-being letter, you can select no recent contact for this column. And then you'll have to see the user manual, which describes how to enter instability status if you use any of the questions in the example letter. This concludes Tool 6 well-being letter. Next. Tool 7 is titled Spreadsheet that provides the overall instability status based on information collected in tools 1 through 6. We refer to this as Tool 7 Instability Summary. Next. This slide provides an overview of Tool 7. The purpose of this tool is to provide the user with an instability status for each child based on the information collected in prior tools. Thus, the source of data for Tool 7 is the information your agency collected in tools 1 through 6. This is a summary spreadsheet if you use this as is. Specifically, you do not enter any information in the Tool 7 tab. It has formulas embedded in the spreadsheet that allow it to automatically populate. If you do not use the other tools, you can take the decision tree logic of Tool 7 to create something that works for your agency. And I will describe below how the calculations in Tool 7 works so that you can replicate this work on your own if you wish. Next. The title of this slide is Step 2, How Overall Instability Status Will Be Determined. In Tool 7, the overall instability status for a child is determined using the instability status columns indicated in tools 1 through 6. If the instability status in any previous tool is instability, then the overall instability status for that child will also be instability. If no instability statuses in any previous tools are instability, then Tool 7 will fill in the overall instability status using the logic illustrated in the decision tree on the next slide. Next. The title of this slide is Decision Tree Logic. The decision tree logic is provided as a diagram on the slide. I will walk you briefly through this logic. And again, agencies who create their own system to track instability can use this decision tree to program their data systems to determine overall instability status. The first question in the decision tree reads, is the instability status in any tool instability? If the answer is yes, then the overall instability status for that child will also be instability. But if the answer is no, we proceed on to question 2, which is the instability status for any tool stability unclear? If yes, then the overall instability status for that child will be stability unclear. If no, then the decision tree moves to question 3 that asks if the instability status in any tool is stability. If yes, then the overall instability status for that child will also be stability. If no, then the overall instability status for that child will be no recent contact. Finally, if all instability statuses for a child in the spreadsheet are left blank, then the overall instability status in Tool 7 is no recent contact. Next. The title of this slide is Ways to Use Tool 7 Information. You can use the summary in Tool 7 to understand which children experience post-adoption and guardianship instability, and to possibly target resources or outreach to those children and families. You may also want to create reports about the overall stability of children who have exited foster care to adoption or guardianship, which can be used to better understand how often this occurs and which children are most likely to experience post-adoption and guardianship instability. This concludes Tool 7, the final tool in the toolkit. Next. The title of this slide is Toolkit Suggestions Provided by Adoption Program Managers. For states or counties that are not currently collecting the type of information about instability presented here, the adoption program managers we consulted with suggested that attention should be paid to the following issues. First, agencies need to create system warnings so that information on a child is not inadvertently shared with the wrong person. For example, we want to make sure that adoptive family members and birth family members are clearly delineated so that information is not inadvertently shared with someone who legally should not have it. Second, there may be legal barriers to linking foster and adoption records. Agencies should consult their legal teams in this process. Next. The title of this slide is How Often Should the Toolkit Be Updated? How often the toolkit should be updated will depend on what your agency is able to do. However, we recommend you update tools 1 through 3 at least once a year, and more frequent updates may be useful to ensure you have accurate and timely instability information. For example, you may want to do quarterly updates on subsidy changes, Tool 4, and family services, Tool 5. And we would recommend that you enter information from well-being letters as you receive them. This will allow you to identify families you need to follow up with using Tool 6. Next. This is the end of our presentation. We would like to thank all of the adoption program managers who took the time to speak with us during the development of this toolkit. We know that you're all very busy, dedicated people. So we appreciate the time you spent with us and for all that you do for adoptive and guardianship families across the United States. Thank you.